Good evening, gamers, and welcome back to another episode of The War. That is the weekly anime recommendation, which is the show where I go out, I watch a whole bunch of anime, I sift through all the bad ones, I throw them out, and I come back with one good recommendation for you, the viewer. So today we have a spicy, and I mean spicy anime to talk about. If I had to summarize the anime in one noise, it would sound something like this. Oh, because it is just unbelievably good. It is like watching an orgasm take place on the screen. It is phenomenal. The show in question, of course, is the new Cyberpunk Edgerunners show. It just debuted on Netflix about, a week ago at the time of uploading this. And I had some time, I watched it over the weekend, and I have not been able to stop thinking about it. I binged the whole show. It has just been on my mind. I actually recorded another episode of The War that was going to be this week's War, but I'm putting it off till next week because I'm just so hyped for the show. Edgerunners is based off of the game Cyberpunk 2077, which we all know is universally well received and loved. But if you have any preconceived ideas about the show because of the game, I would forget about the game, because I haven't played the game, I don't know anything about the game, and I still really enjoyed the show. So if I were you, I would just forget about the game and just watch the show. Now, the best way I know how to describe the show is, imagine a Martin Scorsese crime drama had like a love child with Blade Runner or some other cyberpunk movie, and the result is just this beautiful love child of like gritty crime, super like violent and gritty crime, and then sort of the dark neon light but also very gritty aesthetic of a cyberpunk. It's honestly my favorite cyberpunk IP besides Blade Runner itself, which is pretty huge. I'm a pretty big fan of the cyberpunk genre. I watch a fair bit of it. I think they do the genre really, really well. They do it a lot of justice, and it's clearly a project that had a lot of passion go into it. Speaking more about the visuals, I think the visuals really sell this show. Whether it be the action, whether it be even just the most mundane scenes look amazing. You would be very hard-pressed to find a single scene where you aren't just completely captivated by what you're looking at. I know for me, I personally put it on the same stage as like One Punch Man or Fate or Demon Slayer, any of these shows that have insane visuals and insane animation. It has both insane visuals and insane animation. And one thing I think they do really, really well with this, with the art style in general, is they find a really great balance of showing the flashy, neon, bright colors that we expect of a cyberpunk, very borrowed from sort of the Blade Runner movies, but also balancing that out with really dark and gritty colors, like a lot of grays, a lot of browns, a lot of blacks, very like neutral, mute colors. They do the aesthetic very, very well. And I honestly think that's where most Netflix anime sort of gets it right. Most Netflix anime looks very, very good, but there's nothing else really behind it. The other selling point that I really like about this show is because it's a Netflix anime, it doesn't fall into a lot of the anime tropes, but it also doesn't really fall into a lot of the Netflix tropes. I think it's sort of found this really nice little like area that exists between sort of the anime world and the Netflix like uber violent drama world. Like for instance, there's sort of the Daredevil series, which is very like this Netflix violent, like uber violent type of world. I'm trying to think of some other shows. I'll flash them on the screen. I'll think of them in editing. But then there's also sort of like a lot of this like anime like kind of cringe like that they could have borrowed a lot from that they kind of didn't. So it kind of exists between these two extremes, and it's really, really nice. It feels quite original in the way that they do it. One thing I really, really like about the show is there was a consistent theme throughout that is not really apparent. It's not like they're slapping you in the face with like, oh, this is terrible, this is terrible. One thing I don't really like is whenever a show, like, they get some issue in like sort of their narrative and they just keep like slapping the audience in the face. They're like, this character is evil. These actions are evil. It sort of pushes its theme very subtly along. It's sort of the theme of human destructive power and how power corrupts everyone. No character in the show is immune to the corruptive power. Essentially, cyberkinetics is a big part of the show and human enhancement through technology. That's sort of an allegory for destructive power, and it really weighs on every single character in the show at some point or another. You sort of watch it as you go through, and it doesn't really feel like you're learning anything or you're sort of seeing anything, but let me just say, when the end of the show comes about, and I'm not going to spoil it, watch it yourself and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. you just have this sinking feeling in your heart, and you realize the whole time you've been taking in things that you didn't realize. They did it very, very subtly. They delivered the message with tact. It was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful. One of my biggest complaints with the series is sort of the characters, and the characters aren't bad at all. Like, they put effort into all the characters. They're all unique. They're all different. They all sort of have their own thing going. The issue is it's a 10-episode show with 20 minutes an episode, and they have about, I don't know, 8 to 10 main characters. And so it's really difficult to explore 8 to 10 characters in a show of that length. A lot of times there just ends up being a character that pops up and then kind of disappears. And you don't really get a whole lot of depth other than maybe 1 or 2 interesting aspects of them. Again, it's not bad, and I'm interested in all the characters. I'd rather have characters that only show up for a minute and then leave, rather than having a bunch of characters that are just kind of stagnant and boring, like a show called One Piece. But that's one of my biggest complaints, is it feels like the show has a little bit of like ADD. It kind of just, characters pop in, characters pop out, and we don't really get to know them very well, if that makes sense. Another thing I absolutely love about this show is the soundtrack. Like, it just slaps different. I kid you not, every single scene has like literally the perfect music timed to the scene. There's like this one song that is in the book, like first episode and the like last episode, that I just keep playing on repeat because it was such a great song. But even like songs, like not even just the songs, but the like show itself, the soundtrack of the show was just, it was phenomenal. It has a lot of like lo-fi elements, a lot of sort of like EDM, like dance elements to it, very like bright and poppy, fit the theme of the show perfectly. Yeah, it's definitely one of the best soundtracks I think I've heard in an anime, like ever. Another aspect of the story that I like a lot is sort of the narrative style of the story. It borrows a lot from the Cowboy Bebop, I would say, in the sense that between episodes, a lot of time passes, and you sort of you get sort of a progressive feel of the show, but it's not like each episode bleeds into the next. It's like they're very defined like episodes that exist independent of the other episodes, almost. I mean, there is sort of a clear story that's going along, but there events happen between each episode that they don't like explain exactly. You just kind of get the feel for it as you go along, and I think it's really nice. It doesn't weigh the story down at all. A lot of times if you get a show where they're just constantly just info dumping you every episode, it gets really heavy and it's hard to sort of chew on. But this show doesn't do that. It just sort of, it's fast paced, it shows you what it needs to show you, and then it just starts the episode and moves on, and you just sort of follow along. It doesn't feel the need to weigh you down with anything more, and I think it knows when to tell you things, and it knows when to shut the frick up, if you know what I'm saying. So this brings me to my review of the show. I love the show, and I know I probably have a bit of recency bias, so I'm going to give this show a pretty high score. In terms of characters, I'd say it's a 4 out of 5. All the characters were good, and they were like interesting. I don't think it was quite on the same level as, say, like Evangelion. I think Evangelion has like the best characters. Like One Punch Man has amazing characters. This show felt a little bit short of that, so I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. The characters were interesting, they were engaging, they were all unique, but they weren't necessarily, I'd say a 5 out of 5, deserving of a 5 out of 5. In terms of animation quality, oh my goodness, if I could give this show a 6 out of 5, I would. Every single scene just looks phenomenal. They got the color palette perfect. They got the like action scenes, like some of the action scenes, particularly like the opening action scene. If you don't watch any of this show, watch the first like 2 minutes of the first episode, because the action scene was one of the greatest action scenes I've ever seen animated ever. Like, the animation quality is amazing. The colors and art are amazing. If I could, I would give this show a 6 out of 5, but I'm only going to give it a 5 out of 5 because I'm capping it at 5. But amazing animation. I would watch this show just for the animation. In terms of originality of story, it's like, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5 just because Cyberpunk as a genre doesn't really do very well. We don't see a lot of good Cyberpunk IPs. I remember the new Blade Runner anime, I tried to watch it and it was terrible. A lot of the Blade Runner are a lot of the Cyberpunk IPs I see are where they just sort of grab the stylistic elements, they insert it into the story, and then the story's just shit. Like, the whole focus of the show is on the cyberpunk elements, but not on the actual, like, story, right? So I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5 just because we haven't had a really amazing, I think, cyberpunk anime like this ever. So it's almost defining the genre in my mind, right? I mean, I know there's like Ghost in the Shell, Cowboy Bebop's a little bit cyberpunky. Then we had that Blade Runner anime that was really bad, or I thought it was really bad. But yeah, I just don't think there's a lot of like cyberpunk being made in the anime community. So I'm gonna give it a 5 out of 5 for originality. It was definitely, I'd say, the best done cyberpunk anime in my mind. Now, in terms of anime cringe, and I spoke about this a little bit, there's no like anime cringe, I would say. Most of the cringe comes from sort of the Netflix like trying to be super adulty, like throwing sex scenes and full frontal nudity and like F-bombs and like graphic like violence every single like 3 seconds. Like you can't go like 20 seconds without like seeing like some graphic violence or graphic sex or graphic language. And I just think it's kind of a shame. I think the show would be better off if they just sort of slowed down. And, you know, in the scenes where things are tense, yeah, they can drop an F-bomb. And, yeah, there can be some, like, brains splattered across the floor and whatever. And maybe, like, you know, if there's, like, a really intimate moment between two characters, maybe show some nudity. I don't know. It feels kind of diluted whenever it's just constantly thrown at you in your face. Just smack, smack, smack. It feels like they're, like, just, like, backhand slap me one way or the other with it. It's a little distracting. So I'm going to give that a 3 out of 5. In terms of like the anime cringe. It's not really anime cringe, it's just kind of Netflix cringe. I don't know, wait, did I hit everything? I had story, characters, animation. Yeah, I hit everything. Yeah, I cannot recommend this show enough. It has been on my mind. I know I have a bit of recency bias right now, but it is truly a phenomenal show. It's the show, I would deem it the best show of the year, or one of the shows I've enjoyed the most out of the year. I don't think I've enjoyed a show this much since Spy Family came out, right? So yeah, give it a watch. And that's been this week's War. So yeah, thank you for watching. If you want more of my content, please subscribe. If not, then you can like fuck off. And I'll see you later. Take care. Bye-bye.